Hey fam. So this is an unexpected live stream. I did not have a live stream planned today. Excuse me. But um, a conversation just happened and I was like, oh, I want to take advantage of this conversation and talk about it publicly because I was talking to someone inside of a group and I thought this information would be really helpful publicly as well. So hello. If this is your first time watching my live, my name is Shakti, and depending on where you're watching me from, you will notice on the cover image of whatever page that I work in health and fitness and also teaching sovereignty and freedom, spiritually and physically. And so this conversation that came up inside of a group is because I recently joined an ADHD group, which has been really insightful for me because I've recently discovered or put my finger on the fact that I have probably lived with ADHD my entire life and I didn't know about it. And it's what made some facets of my life very difficult and also what probably has given me a lot of creative value and a lot of free thinking ability as well. But I'm currently looking for resources and I'm looking for ways to kind of unpack neurodivergence as an adult and how that shows up in our lives. So I joined this community, and inside of this community, one member posted about really struggling with food. And she went deep into a conversation of how her weight had fluctuated a lot her whole life and how she became really obsessive with food and then went from like binge eating and eating a lot and really hyper focusing on that to not eating anything and then struggling to eat. And she just shared a lot about her journey, and so I kind of gave her some pointers on my journey. And as I was talking to her, I realized that I didn't have her exact journey, but I did struggle with body image dysmorphia for all of my life. To this day, I have touches of it. It's not as intense as it used to be, but there's definitely a touch of it. And what I realized that I did without really knowing what I was doing in an effort to reconnect with my body was turn to physical exercise. That's what I did. And initially, I think I was led there because of weight loss, because I wanted to look different, because I wanted to change my body, and I thought exercise would be the way that I would do that, right? Because like I see these people who go to the gym and they look awesome, and it's like I want to look awesome, so I'm gonna exercise so I look like them. And that was my initial motivation, and I thought that by solving the physical appearance issue, I would fix the internal issue. I was pretty convinced that if I just looked in the mirror and I looked ripped or I looked 20 pounds lighter, I was suddenly magically going to feel better about myself. Guess what didn't happen? That. That did not happen. And I remember being at one of my fittest states in time when I was doing this program called 80-Day Obsession, and I looked amazing. I went to Mexico. It was my first Beachbody trip. I looked awesome. And I still looked in the mirror and didn't feel as awesome as I thought I would feel when I looked the way that I looked. And I knew that I looked good and I knew that I looked awesome, but I didn't feel it inside. It was an internal experience that I didn't have. So my first message here is to not make the mistake of assuming that you are going to fix something physical and then feel differently about yourself internally. Doesn't work that way. It has to come from within, which is why I constantly talk about falling in love with the process of taking care of yourself. Because when you fall in love with the process, you're way more likely to be consistent with health and fitness in your life. And naturally, these changes will occur that you find very encouraging, and they become fun changes instead of being the point and the incentive piece of doing the work. And that's a very important difference. It's a very important distinction. But back to the original topic of this video, what I discovered when I started exercising was very interesting. And then I turned the dial towards nutrition later, because looking at nutrition was a lot harder for me to do than looking at exercise initially. And by and large, with clients, I find that to be true. I think people have a lot easier time receiving exercise and fitness than they do looking at food stuff. So first and foremost, people typically are more open to talking about exercise. So what started to happen when I started exercising was, when you are exercising, you have to pay attention to your body in a way that you don't pay attention to your body otherwise. Because when you're exercising and you're exerting effort, whether you are lifting weights or you're doing cardio or lunging or whatever you're doing, form is very, very important. So you start paying attention to the way you're holding up your body, the way you're doing a lunge, the way you are running in place, the way you are lifting the weights. Your attention gets drawn to the way that your body is performing. And as you begin to develop this relationship to the body and performance, you begin to notice if something is off. Like, you'll notice when you lunge with your left leg, you can get very deep in the lunge, but when you lunge with your right leg, you can't get as deep without feeling a strain, let's say, in the front part of your abdomen, okay? You'll start to notice little things like that. Like when I lift weights, like my left arm has a way easier time lifting the same weight than my right arm. Or little things of that nature, imbalances. You can balance better on this leg and not on that one. And so without you realizing, you start developing a very unique relationship to your body because you're paying attention to it, because you have to, because you're doing something that requires your attention. And what I didn't know was happening then, which I now realize is what happened, is that fitness gave me a platform to begin a new relationship to my body. And the relationship was no longer only about what did it look like in certain clothes, but it became about what is it doing? How is it moving? How is it performing? And I started paying attention to, is it getting stronger? Is it getting faster? Is it getting more agile? Is it getting more balanced? And so the dialogue around my body started changing, which meant that the way that I looked at my body started changing, because now I was not just looking at her as how does she physically appear, but I was looking at her as how is she performing? How is she doing? Right? The relationship changed. The language changed around the relationship as well. And that was a pivotal shift for my brain. That really allowed me to look at myself differently and allowed me to start valuing different things about myself than what I valued before. And in that journey, I started to really fall in love with how much stronger I could get, how much more agile I could get, how I could do the same weights, let's say, a couple weeks later and lift way more or do way more reps of something. And then, of course, I started to notice, like, wow, my arms are changing, my shoulders are changing. I started to then notice a physical change, right? After I started noticing the experience that was changing for me. And of course, everything that comes with exercise, right? Your endorphins and the way you feel energized, you feel alive, you feel strong. It's a very unique feeling that comes with that experience. But just beginning that journey allowed me to change the dialogue around my body and my perception of my body and my appreciation of my body, which prior to that moment or that stage in my life, the only value I gave her was her physical appearance and whether or not she looked thin enough or feminine enough. I don't even know what that meant in my brain then. Wearing certain clothes, but now it was different. It was like, look how fast she is, look how strong she is, look how much she can perform, you know. It was so different. And then after I started like locking and loading that in my life, I started to really look at food, and I really started to, because I had the experience of changing my dialogue with my body, I was like, I can now do this with food. It gave me the courage and it gave me the belief to be able to turn the dial on food and then start developing a different relationship to food and starting to look at food as having purpose and also starting to look as food as divorced of personal value, as divorced of like, this is good food and that is bad food. I started to separate value from food, and I started to do away with calculations that were very complex, and I just changed. But I had the confidence to do that because I had already done it with this other thing in my life. And I think ADHD, non-ADHD, I think this is applicable to anyone who develops an obsession with body image and self, is to give yourself an opportunity to have a different relationship to the very same thing that's creating distress. And You can do this a lot of ways. You can do this by changing the activity that you do with your food or your body. I know for a lot of my clients, when it comes to eating food, when they start preparing their foods in a way that look really pretty, so very colorful, very organized. So, you have a variety of fruits or a variety of vegetables, but the way that you're plating your food looks very appealing. That starts to change their relationship to how they eat, because they no longer just want to eat stuff that looks bland or looks sloppily put together. They're now wanting to eat something that looks pretty. So they're taking a different amount of time and energy to create that for themselves, right? So that's, to me, that's a form of art. That's a form of creativity that comes into the healing process. But there's a lot of different ways that we can alter that relationship. But it starts with seeing yourself do something different, interrupting the pattern that you currently have, changing the language that's in your head, the words that you're using to have the relationship to the body or to the food or to whatever that is. And in my case, over the course of the past 4 years, the amount of healing that has happened has been remarkable. It hasn't been overnight. It didn't happen once I lost the weight. It took way longer than that. I lost the 35 pounds in a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and kept it off consistently. But the true healing, where I stopped looking and judging harshly, and I stopped really feeling like crap, and I stopped cycling, and I stopped beating myself up, and I stopped talking to myself poorly, happened over the past year. Really deeply happened over the past year. So this is a long-term commitment, you guys. If you guys are in the struggle right now, please get out of the mindset that you're going to drop the 20 pounds and you're suddenly going to feel differently about yourself. That's not going to happen. And I hate to say that. I think you might be excited for 5 seconds, but it doesn't last, because what you actually want is to feel differently about you. And if you want to feel differently about you, then you need to cultivate a different relationship to you. And that's going to take establishing habits and behaviors that you currently don't have, that you need to bring into your life, and that you need to keep in your life because you want them in your life and you want to take care of yourself. It's a whole different approach to weight loss. It's an entirely different approach to fitness. It's an entirely different approach to body image, dysmorphia, and relationships to food. But it is the one that I firmly believe lasts the longest and serves you the most. So just wanted to come on here and share a little personal testimony inspired by that conversation that I had in that group, which has been such an amazing group to be a part of and so insightful for someone like me who's just beginning this journey. And I'm realizing how much wisdom I have to bring to this conversation around food and fitness, which tends to be a sensitive point for people who go into extremes very easily, which is not uncommon in the ADHD community, as I'm seeing. So if you have any questions about this, if you don't want to comment publicly, I understand this can be kind of sensitive. Feel free to message me. I'm happy to answer your questions. And the food group I was running, I had a couple people ask me about it. It is, now we've come to the point where if you were going to join us, you'd have to wait to the next round because we're a little bit advanced now. We're a couple weeks in. But I do have a boxing group starting. So if you did want to get into some movement or some fitness, you can still join us for the boxing group. It starts on Monday. So just write me real quick and I'll get you the form to fill out so that we can figure out how to get you in there best way for you. And we'll get you started with us. It's the same program that I'm doing. So if you've watched my stories, if you've seen any of my posts, it is that program, which is a combination of boxing and weight training. And we can talk a little bit about food in there if you want as well. If that's your primary interest, then I can for sure help you with that as well. But it is focused on boxing training. All right, my friends, have an awesome Saturday and a great weekend. And hopefully this really touched you and served you in some significant way. And of course, if you know anybody who needs to hear this message or process this message, feel free to tag people, share it. It's public stuff. All right, y'all. Love y'all. Be well.